Thank you guys for coming, and to people online. This is the CMS Lunchtime Policy Series, and we're trying something a little bit new. We have Nalini Chhetri joining us from Arizona State University, and Nalini is going to be speaking to you live webcast. So we ask if you have any questions for Nalini during her talk to please use the chat box. And just to be patient with both of us, we're going to make sure that she can address your questions appropriately, but it may take a little bit of time. So for those of you who don't know, CMS stands for Carbon Monitoring Systems, and it's the NASA Carbon Monitoring Systems Initiative. This is a large project essentially addressing sources and sinks of carbon and having an understanding of biomass, atmospheric flux, and ocean carbon, how they are all connected, related to each other, and how we can use the products coming out of CMS to address policy decisions. So Nalini works for Arizona State University. Her talk is Boundary Processes in the Development of Phoenix Greenhouse Gas Emission Inventory for Operations. The GHG planning and initiative is something that we hope to address with some of the CMS products. So thank you, Nalini, for addressing this. We're very curious on boundary organizations, how you view data, how decisions are made. And before I let Nalini start, for those of you here, we do have coffee and pastries in the back. And this series is co-hosted by the Joint Global Carbon Cycle Center and the CMS project. So please help yourself, and thank you to JGCCC. And let's see. Our next policy series talk will be next month, and that is July 8th. We post that up on our secondary screen, so for those of you here can see that. And I'm not going to delay for Nalini any longer. So, Nalini, if you'd like to go ahead and start your talk, I'm going to turn off my camera and then and let you begin.
All right. Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. Greetings from Arizona State University for those of you who are there at the Space Center and those of you online and listening in. It's very early here at Arizona, but it's kind of cool. It's only 100 degrees. I want to thank Vanessa and Sabrina and Lucia who've been helping me set up this live webcast. Before I start, I just wanted to give you a quick background on why I feel I'm qualified to talk about this process. I've been working with the cities and with the municipalities in the city of Phoenix for about close to 5 years now. I've worked very closely with them, and I also run the Center for Integrated Solutions to Climate Challenges, where our main focus and mission is on translating the science, especially climate science, to stakeholders and providing the feedback loop. And so that has been quite an experiment in itself, and we regard the center, or the Climate Center, as kind of like a boundary organization. So I know this is relatively new process we're going through, so I will try to keep track of the chat questions, but if I miss, it's not intentional, so please feel free to pass it to Vanessa. So let's see, I'm going to move along now. So my talk is about the boundary processes, and I want to start by actually talking about the definition. Boundary organization, it's the second paragraph there, borrows from the work of Dave Gustin, who I work with very closely at Arizona State University on what it means, the paradigm through which you transfer useful knowledge between politics and science. But what the definition that I've come up with, boundary processes, is actually trying to identify this very dynamic, ever-changing, often ambiguous systems that is both negotiable and non-negotiable channels that we work on when we look at the environment between the academics and the political paradigms, especially in municipalities and cities. So this has been quite an experiment in itself, and I hope to be able to talk about this today. So the methodologies I have used in order to come up with some of the findings and some of the issues that I'll be talking about in the next 40 minutes is actually the way I've designed it is to talk to you about two basic case studies that's related with greenhouse gas emissions inventory in the city of Phoenix, and maybe there's a third one following up as a third example. I have conducted many in-depth interviews, both with the stakeholders, policymakers, decision makers in the city of Phoenix, inner city of Phoenix, but the larger city metro, which consists about 24 cities. I have worked in this field for about 5 years, so I call that experiential knowledge. The state climatologists, there are 48 of them in the country, and the Arizona state climatologist and I work very closely in the same unit, and we've been doing that for the last 4 years. So I use her experiences, uh, and I've talked about the collaborative work with stakeholders. But I run the Climate Center, which is the boundary organization. I'm also in the steering committee of Sustainable Cities Network, which is the loose connection network of cities and tribal nations, four of them in the city of Phoenix. We also have the city of Tucson and the second largest city in Arizona, and then city of Flagstaff as a newer member of this network, which really is uh, um, uh, a collaboration of resource managers, people on the front line who really have to implement some of these policies that are um, 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 foisted on them. And then we have what's called the Walton Sustainable Solution Services. It is a unit within ASU that focuses on much more solution delivery rather than being an academic exercise. So these are the different issues that I wanted to highlight to you. Now, let me see if I can go there. All right. So let me describe Phoenix a little bit. It's one of the hottest cities in the United States. Includes, like I said earlier, 24 cities and 4 Native American tribes. It is also the 13th most populous city in the United States, and we kind of duel with Philly in the sense of that we are sometimes the sixth or the fifth largest city in the country. So coming back to my first example, in 2012, I was one of the co-authors of the greenhouse gas emissions reduction report that we submitted to the city of Phoenix. And that took about 8 months, the process in itself. And I want to give you quickly the background about how that came about. So in 2008, the Phoenix City Council, they adopted a mandate to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the city operations, the municipal operations, to 5% below the 2005 level by 2015. So by 2009, they invited ICLEI and the consultants with ICLEI to do their emissions inventory for them. And the the bottom line of that was that the emissions was projected to rise by 14% if the city did not take appropriate action. So in 2012, we've been working very closely with the city managers, the environmental managers by then, and they had come to the conclusion that the greenhouse gas emissions for 2005 was actually higher than they had actually predicted, measured at that time, and it was revised to 678,150 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. So this was the background within which when we came in and to do our own emissions inventory. So when we completed the emissions inventory late 2013, we were happy to report, and the city was ecstatic that the operations fell by 7.2% from their original 675 and 150 metric tons to 629,504 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And this was great for the Democratic mayor at that time. It was a good PR soundbite to use. They were able, so that also motivated the city council to look at the regional greenhouse gas emissions inventory. Then the question was asked was which sectors did the best job in reducing their emissions. And as you can see, I hope this graph is clear to folks, is that actually the employee commute emissions went up, and the other GAC hauling and regeneration that was never counted in the original report, that went up. Everything else stayed the same. There was a correction on the E-grid factor, so the T&D loss actually, so they were able to make the correction, so we saw a reduction there. but most of the reduction came about in landfills. So because of the ability to capture methane and to pipe it and to wheel it out, it was actually the biggest, in addition to the egret factor correction, um, uh, um, uh, uh, leading to the reduction in their emissions reporting. So I have a little bit of an allergy. Now, in all of this, I think the technical part was very easy to get to understand. The measurement part was also easy to understand. But what was very obvious, became very obvious to us as we started to talk with the City of Phoenix folks, was the culture within the city. So is that why would you want a greenhouse gas emissions inventory done only for the cities? Why would you not want it for the community? Why would you like to do it for the regional? So all of that conversation, through all of that conversation, uh, we found out that the city of Phoenix had its own cultural context to deal with. So we had decision makers who really said, we want to be in the middle of the pack. We don't want to be, trendsetters like Seattle and San Francisco. We want to be maybe like somewhat cities in Utah. um, who do we most resemble? We don't want to be behind the pack. We don't want to be in front of the pack. We want to be in the middle of the pack. So there are these issues that we slowly realized that we had to be aware of in order to find out how and in what way we wanted to do new kind of carbon emissions monitoring work with the city. And also we increasingly realized, that's my third bullet point, is that the environmental managers wanted to make decisions in very small, incremental baby steps. They were not willing to be creative. They are not willing to take risks. And the other thing was they were quite kind of proud that the city is really a relatively well-managed city, and they want to keep it that way. So that cultural context became important in order for us to understand how we needed to approach them going forward. In this, it's also important to understand how the governance structure within municipalities and cities. So I'll start with the third bullet point first. So we work a lot with the departmental staff, environmental managers, sustainability officers, departmental heads, and all of them want to not, it's important for them to have buy-in from their colleagues, from their leaders, but also from the university. And that takes time. Then you have the executive branch with elections coming on and with political appointees. It was very obvious that the departmental staff were looking to their leadership, executive branch, to make sure that there was a buy-in, there was a positive um, um, acceptance about what it is that they were doing. Otherwise, they felt that they would be stonewalled. The most important body, of course, was the city council. And for everything that was of any significant value, needed approval of the city council. And the city council in Arizona tends, of course, to be a little bit on the conservative side. And so that becomes another issue on how do we develop a narrative that allows us to persuade our legislative body to approve of these plans around greenhouse gas emissions, around other kind of work that we want to do. So as I looked at some of the NASA projects, and I was around carbon, and for us at Arizona State University and in Arizona in general, um, and I am the climate change science manager here, so I'm in the thick of this all the time, is that it is very, the word climate, the word climate change, the word global warming, carbon emissions, they're not even talked about, leave alone being a priority or a theme in any kind of environmental planning. The focus here is, of course, on energy and air quality and much more on water resources. So if carbon is at all talked about, it tends to be embedded very much into issues of transportation, air quality, and in transportation, of course, the engineers and other technical staff take over. So just to have the conversation around climate and carbon emission has been quite a challenge in itself. And that is, again, the cultural context within which we have to talk about. But having said that, when you talk with, I talk with hundreds and I work with scores of people in the cities. The environmental managers here all want to be able to manage carbon emissions. They're very concerned about it. They want to be able to mitigate the impact of carbon emissions, but they want to be trained also on how do you handle, what are the sound bites you need to have, what are the narratives that you need to construct about how to talk to people about that, how to motivate people about that. And so their frustration with us, the researchers, with us, the academics, is that, and I have some of the quotes in the second and third and fourth bullet points is that, and these are direct quotes, academics forget the politics that we have to deal with. That's what they say to me and say to us all the time. That academics, you need to consider the politics of the area before new tools can be implemented. You come up with new tools, you come up with new science, and it's all good and we want to do it, but you really don't understand the constraints we have to work under. So you really need to be aware of that. In AZ, they say climate tools developed related to climate and carbon emissions do not fly politically. Or they will say that, project related to the climate and carbon emission does not get funded, period. Our council will not approve it. So these are the constraints, even though there is this understanding that we need to do something about it. They feel stymied by some of these cultural contexts within which they have to operate. So this brings to me the second example that I've been talking about. So after the successful launch about the greenhouse gas emissions inventory we did last year, the council was happy that they reached their goal, and they said, okay, so the timing was good for us to say, okay, why don't we do regional inventory? So the city manager and the environmental manager and the mayor all pushed for this. There was this critical mass around it. And so the regional greenhouse gas inventory proposal was put. It was approved by the council. So we took this opportunity to say, hey, let us introduce a new tool here. What if we try to do, instead of a spreadsheet, kind of just producing numbers through using ICLID protocol, why don't we use carbon emission visualization? So we introduced them to Kevin Gurney's work. Kevin Gurney is an atmospheric scientist who has done some carbon emission visualization in Indianapolis. He's he's a NASA scientist, and he works with, he's doing some work in LA, in Salt Lake City. So the climate center that I run, we worked with Kevin to start an initial visualization of Maricopa County. This is the county within which Arizona is located, to start to do this using the data. And so we use this in our proposal to the cities and to the utility companies, which is the largest is APS and SRP, which is Salt River Project, Southwest Gas. We tried to bring them to the table a couple of times, and gave them this basic template of initial work we had done on visualization of carbon emissions, and we had done a dynamic model also. I wasn't able to put this on the slide here today just because of technical probability, but we thought that they would really be happy with this. That they would take this up and say, and run with it. But we were in for a little bit of a shock, to put it mildly. So what happened was that when we introduced this idea of trying a little bit of a carbon monitoring emissions module and tools that we thought would speak to them, there was a real pushback. And I want to talk a little bit about what this pushback was that they were the utility companies, some of the large industrial companies. We have Honeywell, we have Boeing, we have Intel, whose headquarters are here in the various cities in Phoenix Metro. They basically talked about that if you have a visualization that shows the spatial, and then of course we have a fourth dimensional temporal distribution of emissions, then you immediately know who the largest emitters are. And they tend to be SRP, one of the utility companies, because they also own the power plant here at Arizona. And they'll immediately, so the visualization will immediately identify hotspots And so for them, that had huge negative PR implications. And so there was also this, and so they said, oh no, no, they are going to identify that we are the biggest emitters. We can't allow that. So there was this very heated argument, and this has happened over a period of time about not being cool, as they said, with this idea of using carbon emission visualization. So there's also this idea on resistance to this, for resistance to us asking them for finer resolution data to develop finer level resolution. And that was, they said, primarily based on privacy concerns, property rights, government overreach. We can't give you the household data. We cannot give you the parcel data. And also, we have not been able to test it, but this is their perceived fear that they could be put on notice by the public, by the media, and then the focus would shift from the community emissions inventory to rather to them because they are identified to be the hotspot. So there was this huge pushback on against using this carbon emission visualization tool. Technically, even though we are having this is a current state of affairs for us. Technically, for them, the concept around carbon emissions mapping, carbon emissions estimates and fluxes are still, to them, the concept is still abstract. And the other thing that we found out was that they found out that they know that we have to use certain kind of software to work on this. So there is less control from their side. So there is a certain kind of wariness about how they can use this software, and also it implies as a heavy duty work, requiring complex software and centralized data system with huge technological know-how, and the cities may not have the capability to do that. So that was the other added thing that that allowed them to that actually made them push back on this notion. So they said, we came back to it and said, forget about all that. Why can't we still do the ICLEI model? It's just number, it's spreadsheet, it's aggregate numbers. We're happy with it. A lot of people do it. It's widely endorsed. The World Resource Institute does it. It's been around for some time. It provides statistics that we are familiar with. It's open source. We don't have to pay a whole lot of money for it, and things like that. So there is this need to hold on to something that's familiar, something that they're comfortable with, something that they can deal with, rather than working with new tools that are coming down the pipeline for them. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of an example of, the electrical companies, to add to the challenges, electrical companies in Arizona, the state of Arizona. And I've mentioned the two largest electrical companies, which is APS, which you see in the middle, which is like the bluish greenish, and then the SRP, which are the largest. But we have very small companies, like right up on the northwest, small purple-ish, that's a sulfur spring. And let me just go back to that a little bit, is that, so we have large companies, and we also have very small companies that, show my pointer there, which service about maybe 150 people. And what that means is that in terms of trying to reduce our carbon emissions, we do have systemic issues that we need to deal with in Arizona. So the egret factor that I mentioned earlier on, that was recalculated for the city of Phoenix, has become a point of contention for these different electrical companies that we see in the state of Arizona. So you have, on the second point, progressive utility companies that they want to reduce the emissions, but they are in direct contradiction with the smaller, because they have to deal with the smaller high coal utility districts like Sulphur Spring. And so what happens is that because the regional egret factor that allows, which Arizona is the AZNW, the NM, which is the Arizona New Mexico region. So the problem is utility companies that have a higher renewable energy portfolio are still not able to go past the E-grade factors because that they have to deal with the other coal burning companies. So, and then the coal burning companies, my third point, are reluctant to change because they've been they feel that by increasing their renewable energy portfolio, they might open themselves to regulatory burdens. And so even though they are aware that eventually they might have to come to terms with this, utility companies, we feel, needs to be constantly nudged. There is this tension that it is very hard to, some of these companies have been in existence for over 100 years, and they feel that they need to continue with business as usual model. So there is this underlying tension with utility companies, both the progressive as well as the traditional ones. The academics, Arizona State University, U of A with University of Arizona, and the city managers on how to increase the renewable energy portfolio. And so I think I needed to give you this one example about the complexity of our electrical companies in the state of Arizona. And the other issue that we have faced in the last 4 years and continue to do so is that when the university comes to the stakeholders with new tools and new models and new knowledge on science on how around carbon and around climate, there is a little bit of a challenge in translating and transferring the science, and it's partly because at the municipality level there's a little state-of-the-art knowledge generation culture. It's more about we have to get things done. It's not so much about knowledge, getting knowledge. It's like, what do we don't have the time. We just have to get the things done. So we don't have the luxury of getting new information and processing that. It's also stakeholders are really more used to doing something that they are familiar with, and I talked about this a little bit earlier about and using models and using models and using softwares that they are familiar with. They found out that if we bring new tools and if we bring new programs, then it really becomes a hassle for them because they have to get their IT folks in, and with the recession, a lot of reduction in staffing. Their computers and their hardwares are, for the most part, outdated. I was told to write this point down that they still operate the outdated, maybe out there Windows XP. Then there is always this very much systemic resistance to new tools, and some of these systems and the hardwares are more than 10 to 12 years old, and they're difficult to get rid of. And the older staff who are ready to retire, they're not willing to reinvent themselves and to train themselves to learning new tools. So there are these very cultural issues. So we always then ask the question, all right, so all of this resistance, so what do you think is going to work? And then the managers come back to us and say, all right, come to us with tools that will save us money. Come to us with tools that makes the most of our resources. Come to us with tools that enables better planning. Will it also provide better customer service? Because at the city level, at the front line, that's what we are concerned about. That's our mission. That's our goal. Will it provide new jobs? Will it allow us to brand the city positively? Because the cities are in competition with other cities. And so will it allow us to manage our cities better? Will it require more regulation? Then that's a no-no. And will we be seeking potential lawsuits? That's a no-no. So within these frameworks, if we are able to produce tools that allow them to do that, then actually the cities, they feel that they can really work with us. And there has been a lot of examples where the university has been able to reach some of these, fulfill some of these requirements. So having said that, then I want to bring to you a third example that I mentioned earlier on, is that I work very closely with the state climatologist, Arizona state climatologist. We have a Arizona state climate office, and so there they have a really a working positive model. And the focus there is a little bit, it's a little bit of a digression from carbon emission. But I just wanted to give this talk to you and this example to you about an issue that has worked. So this is around agriculture and water conservation, and Phoenix actually has one of the best managed water systems in the world, and unfortunately or fortunately, we have also one of the cheapest water systems in the world, and we have per unit, we have the cheapest water, I think, in any city in the world, despite the fact we live in a desert. So, when you talk with the state climatologist and you talk with the stakeholders that they deal with, then their focus is very specific, and the community of tends to know each other very well. So there is this trust factor. We find that in that world, the discussions occur not so much as in meetings, which is very linear, or presentation, but it's a much more of a workshopping environment where there is exchange of information both from the users as well as from the academics as well as from the experts. And then there is this continual process of exchange of science happening instead of just a few discrete events like we tend to do when we introduce new models. Here, in agricultural extension and water, it tends to be a little bit more continual process. The tools are regularly tested over and over again. And then I would encourage people to go to the site and useful to usable. I'm not able to do that right now because of technical issues, but that's, just to give you an example how that works. And the state climatologists are really trained to listen to their stakeholders, so that informs their new research, it informs how they move their feedback loop, it informs how they develop new tools and the refinement that they do to their new tools. And so we have learned a lot to really stop and listen, which is really and how that really informs our science, and that has really been, I think, an important learning from to us as researchers from the state climate office. So what they value most at the state climate office is how really people on the ground, who are the people on the ground? How do you value the people on the ground? How do you develop an infrastructure system that creates this unified group of people? How do you speak a common language? So, like at the county level, at cities, at states, at Army Corps, private consultancy, at some point we have found that in this particular example, they all seem to have some kind of a common training in understanding how to use data. Now, this has taken over 100 years. So, of course, this has taken a lot of time and a lot of resources, and we have not had that in carbon emission monitoring. So, I think we shouldn't lose heart now that it's going to take time. We just need to keep on doing this. But just building the relationship, allowing people to feel part of the same whole loop, I think it's going to be the most important part of trying of ensuring that new tools get adopted. So we have a long ways to go. And then, of course, which is one of the hardest things to do in climate and carbon emission, is that we do not have we have a lack of demonstrable impact, and that's not tangible. It's not tangibly evident, and that has been the very hard part. It's very abstract, and so in order to avoid that, I think that's been one of our biggest challenges. In trying to make people understand the issues around carbon monitoring and carbon emissions monitoring. So I'm coming towards the end of my talk, but I just wanted to give you that recently, when the National Climate Assessment came out at Arizona State, we held series of workshops for the southwestern region with University of Arizona, and to kind of bring together stakeholders at the cities and the municipalities to talk about what it is that the issues that they were facing in terms of trying to let folks know about, academics and researchers know about what it is that they feel what kind of new tools should be developed so that it could help them manage and plan their cities better. It's also about what are the channels we need to create in order to make sure that they know what are the new tools being developed out there so that they are on top of it. So we have found that this kind of interactions, which is small groups, constant, continual, is not expensive, but it's very resource intensive in the sense of taking a lot of people time. But that there is no shortcut to that. And so that brings me to the end of my talk. I think about 35 minutes. And I need to acknowledge all of these people who have helped me. So I think I'm a little early, but I thank you so much for listening to me, and I am happy to take any questions.
Nalini, thank you. That's very useful. And for the Carbon Monitoring System Initiative and CMS applications, what our group is doing is it's trying to essentially take the products from within CMS, which are clearly useful, and translate that into a user-friendly language. So you bring up some really sensitive points for how CMS applications is working, and trying to always demonstrate that there is a glass half full sort of scenario when implementing the science into policy. So I'm curious, and you've talked about this a little bit, but as a boundary organization, especially with water resources and air quality in Phoenix, when you're looking at the science, what is the approach for the glass being half full? I mean, are there incentives in Phoenix? What's the way to move some of these scientific products into action for Phoenix? For Maryland, it's very different. I mean, we've identified the use of biomass products and the use of canopy cover maps being a huge benefit in terms of identifying shade. And that is a big plus for the state. They want to know where is the shade because that impacts tourism. So it's something that we didn't think of offhand, and I'm curious, as you deal with these organizations, are you learning what the value is from their perspective versus ours? Because as scientists and researchers, we perceive value very differently than them.
I think that's a constant question that we have among ourselves. So again, the thing we struggle with is that we have created different outlets by which we translate science. So we have the Climate Center at ASU. We have the DCDC, which is the Decision Center for Desert City. We have lots of these units, boundary organizations whose mission is to be the translate science for city managers. And so one of the things is, so the city managers and others will say, we don't have time to read the journal articles. So we have developed climate briefs, policy briefs. We do these sustainable series talk. We provide food and lunch, and we do it constantly. So then we do workshops. So we try to cater to these short, visually appealing, but also creative platforms with which we can interact. So we actually also invite policymakers who have lots of experiences, decision makers who have lots of experience, to come on board and be the expert discussant or the expert presenter. So it's not just the academics and the researchers doing it. And then we also do collaborative efforts where we try to work together. So we have water managers, we have environmental managers collaborating on projects where they are the co-PIs on this. So I'm currently just finished doing a tree and shade project for the city of Tempe, where this is another city here in the Phoenix Metro. And so they were blown away by the modeling we did on what it meant to have 25% canopy cover for their cities and how that it was going to mitigate the heat. And so things like that. But by involving them right from the beginning was key, rather than giving them the product at the end. Because we found out that when the lack of ownership towards a product, towards a tool, is as a great deterrent in making sure, and it makes sure that it doesn't get adopted, not doesn't even get talked about. That's key. We found out that you need to have we use in different kind of software and models, and just having people talk about that often at the city level is key. And for that, and that for them, that is the start in making sure that things become more familiar to them. So in the cities, it's to have this constant dialogue. So we invite them constantly through the sustainability network group that we have. So we make sure like twice a month, 3 times a month, that city folks come into the university premises. We go to then the researchers also go out there to their own premises for a tour, for a conversation, for a meeting. So because individual faculty here are unable to do that, the boundary units, there are about 20 of us, 20 units at ASU. We utilize these units to kind of invite faculty to join us, um, and then go out to the units, because the individual faculty is not able to do the management of itself. So these boundary organizations that I'm talking about, that I mentioned earlier on my first or second slide, becomes crucial as the channel, as the platform through which we do that. And but despite all the presentation and all of the collaboration we do, we found that there is no shortcut to developing a relationship. The environmental managers, 4 or 5 of whom that I work closely with, tell me that the biggest change maker is for them to be able to pick up the phone and call me by my first name, and saying, instead of saying Dr. Chhetri, they'll say, Nalini, hey, can we have a meeting? That freedom, they say, is actually key, and it allows them to adopt and talk about new ideas and new tools much more than anything else. So relationship building, trust building, so that they understand, they don't feel this hierarchy with it, academics being, very well educated, and us being the implementers. That kind of gets brought down, and that wall needs to be demolished. And I think that is the value, the biggest value we bring, because a lot of these people are very, very smart, and they are very, very motivated to do well for their cities. It's I think more, I feel it's from our academic side, it's more we haven't pushed ourselves more to going into their realms and helping the cities and the municipalities, and we need to make it more if we are going to do user-inspired research or applied science. I hope I answered your question.
You did, no, and I agree with you. Are there any questions for the people sitting in here about this? Please go ahead. I'll have a mic.
I'm not quite sure I understand the definition of a boundary organization. What does that mean?
Nalini, can you give us a short description of what a boundary organization really is? I think for people that are used to dealing with the social and the physical science combined, I think it's easy to assess. But a lot of our audience, and some of the people that we deal with here at Goddard, and I think in general, lay people don't necessarily know what it really is to be a boundary organization. You're dealing with the boundary between social and physical science, or what exactly?
Okay.
How do you define yourself?
Theoretically, the idea was that, so we had, let me back up a bit here. So boundary organization, and the way we understand this is, let me back up a bit again. So conceptually, the boundary organization was an idea that came about during a workshop in 2000, maybe at Harvard. Dave Guston, and I have the slide here, and William Clark and Mark Miller and other people like that sat down to kind of explore this paradigm that's an overlap between academia and policymaking. It's almost like this bridge. How do people talk? How do you translate knowledge, that's the science, and how do you translate it into and make sure that it gets implemented. So the concept of boundary organization came about after that workshop, and it has, of course, developed since then. But it's really trying to bridge this two paradigms of academia and an implementing organization, be it state agencies, NGOs, be it municipalities, whoever are in the front line. So, so the boundary organization then, we believe, needs to be straddling these two worlds, and academia and the faculty can't do it. So we create these organizations that, for example, we call it the Climate Center at ASU, we call it the Sustainable Cities Network, we call it the Decision Center for Desert City. What they do is their mission is not just to generate science, um, but to actually make sure that that science gets implemented. So if there is, for example, if there is an idea around water management, if there is an idea about how water systems, how water can be managed, then most of the time what we do as researchers is that we are happy to get it published. We are happy to um, uh, 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 um, um, talk about it in our conferences and academic conferences. But then we hope that some enlightened policymakers or decision makers takes that science and runs with it. And for the most part, it happens, but it takes 15 to 20 years. The idea is, how do we accelerate that process? Can we take it a step further? We as researchers who have taken the time to understand this issue in a much more complex and a much more in-depth manner, because we've had the time to study it, can we go a step further? And can we create a platform that allows us to do that? So the boundary organization then becomes that platform, because then it allows us to create a mission where our goal is not just to generate knowledge, but the goal, it then also becomes to apply that knowledge, and what are the pitfalls that comes with that knowledge, to be considerate and to be familiar with the pitfalls too. And so that's why some of our researchers are not able to so the researchers are able to really understand what are the issues on the field, and that will again feed back into their own research interest. So the boundary organization is both clearly a platform, but it's also a thought process that allows you to translate the scientific knowledge into something that is useful and has applications in the field.
Does that answer your question?
Somewhat. How are they structured? I mean, is it basically an academic unit?
I encourage you to read up Guston et al. He has Dave's work is really, I think, will be useful in answering the more theoretical aspects of it.
Nalini, going a little deeper into what a boundary organization is there a specific structure to a boundary organization? Does it have to be academic? Because even though it's taken 10 to 15 years to build up, and it's a foundation of building this relationship and making sure that you both understand the objectives of your stakeholders while you also understand the science. And you have to obviously make that bridge and that connection between the two groups and make it transparent so there's benefit to, you explain the benefit on both sides in the language of each group. How is the boundary organization really structured, or is it just kind of free and open that these groups with this knowledge in mind can just come together and create that bridge?
So I'm also a research fellow at the Consortium for Science Policy Outcomes, where Dave Guston is the co-director. And so we have this conversation all the time. And the idea is that I think there are a couple of characteristics of boundary organization that we think needs to be in place. One is that it needs to straddle both worlds, whichever world it may be. It doesn't necessarily have to be academia, but it has to be different entities. For example, it needs to allow a flow of something, flow of knowledge. So if you have the same unit, you don't have that flow. So it tends to usually be for example, from an NGO into a state agency. So that can be but the boundary organization, the mission of a boundary organization is also embedded in social science. So the idea is to understand a little bit more about the cultural context of why it is that some of the science doesn't get adopted. Why is it that some of the information around the knowledge does not percolate to where it was intended to percolate to, and so 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 we still struggle to understand whether that would require a physical manifestation, or whether that is really in the personality of people who happen to um, who happen to uh, be located in those entities. That is up. I think that depends on whoever wants to create these boundary organizations. We also find that sometimes the entities that are straddling, some of the entities that themselves become boundary organizations. For example, we felt that in Arizona State University, this is a large university, that we were seen as this ivory tower. We were seen as researchers behind the computers and in their labs, just doing their work, and then spewing out tools and not really talking to people. And they said, come and talk to us. But then the individual would go out and talk to people, and that's it. It's very hard for researchers to constantly go out and talk to people. So there was this need to create some kind of an infrastructure, and in our case, it tended to become a physical infrastructure, housed by people who had interest who had social science interest, but were from, for example, like an engineering background. So we have lots of people at ASU now who are engineers, who are geologists, who also have who have also leaned towards social sciences, because understanding the dynamics of human behavior and how they make decision making is filled with uncertainty, to put it mildly. So it became an issue of changing the culture as much as creating an infrastructure within our own minds, but within the entities too. So definitely, it's not just a physical infrastructure, definitely not, but it's much more about training. So we have created within the Consortium for Science Policy Outcomes here courses. We have created curriculums. We now have an undergrad and graduate level symposiums and classes and degree program that focuses on boundary organizations, because we've actually graduated I think about 4 or 5 Ph.D. students in the last couple of years. So we are looking at creating so we are also examining the issues and understanding what a boundary organization should be in an education field through our academic channel, but also experimentally. And one of the biggest ways we are doing this is also including a lot of engineers here, because they tend to be much more have a higher status in municipalities. So so they tend to have higher seen as having a higher value, if you will. So working with engineers to kind of understand their perspective, but also trying to figure out what it is that what are the constraints that they feel in talking with translating science and translating technical issues, and so that's the conversation that we keep on having too. So it's a multi-pronged approach in trying to create this soft organization, if you will.
Thanks, Nalini. And I can't agree with you more. It is a long process. I'm not sure I think that Kevin Gurney is part of the CMS for NASA. He's on one of the teams there's 37 separate ones. It's okay, but he's part of the team, and so we're really trying to bring in that bridge and just kind of translate the science into just relevant societal uses. And something that CMS is doing is actually it's happening on Monday at this in Annapolis, is within the Department of Natural Resources, similar to what you do with DCDC and with water managers. We're taking one of the biomass products from Altitude Bio, looking at canopy maps and looking at biomass over time, the changes in biomass over time, and really trying to understand beyond the Department of Forestry within the state of Maryland, where are the benefits of this particular data product? How will it benefit other policies? So we started with greenhouse gas reduction plan, and we started looking at other policies as well, but we had to engage with the stakeholders at DNR. And like I said, they brought up policies that we didn't necessarily feel were top of the list. I mean, they addressed shade. They addressed the use of LiDAR for the bathymetry for the Chesapeake Bay program, looking at lawn to leaf and where are the gaps and how can the forestry department use LiDAR to monitor the growth and the planting program of their new trees over time. So it really is a long process. There is a lot of engagement that needs to take place. So it's nice to know you guys are so active in this. It would be really great to follow up with you after our workshop on Monday with all the county reps and just kind of get some feedback as to what we can do and how this can move forward.
Disconnected. This call will now end.
That's our policy line. Sorry, or not our policy line, our little telecom line. So I think we were scheduled for an hour. But we are at the top of the hour, and there are no questions in the audience, I don't believe. And we've addressed everything online.
But if there are questions that come later on, I would be happy to
send them to you,
send it by email. I would be happy to answer, and I hope it was useful and people enjoyed it. And thank you so much for listening.
We appreciate this. Thank you. Yeah. All right, Nalini, thank you so much. And that concludes your talk, and it also concludes the lunch series for today. Please help yourself to pastries and coffee. And again, the talk next month, if I can strain my eyes from here, will be Jeremy, and I'm trying to remember the organization that he's from. Jeremy Friend is from Wildlife Works Network, and he is addressing, Lucia, can you remind me his title? Because I can't read it from here.
MRV in the tropics.
Thank you. So he's addressing MRV in the tropics, and this is one of our speakers that works quite regularly down in the Congo. So we're looking forward to his talk. And that will be the last talk of our series. We're taking the summer for research purposes. We know everybody has plans, but we'll have feedback and opportunity to suggest speakers on the CMS website, so carbon.nasa.gov, and we will see all of you next month. Thank you. Thanks, Nalini. Take care.
Thank you so much.